Republicans and Democrats who are willing to work together.
Dr. Paul, there's this question of argument versus accomplishment. The question again comes from Facebook. Heath Treat writes, Paul Treat rather. I want to know what Ron Paul's plan of action will be to achieve getting the House and Senate to help him do all he's promised. And here's the record, Dr. Paul. You have actually sponsored 620 measures. Only 4 made it to a vote on the House floor, and only 1 has been signed into law.
You know, that demonstrates how much out of touch the U.S. government and the U.S. Congress is with the American people, because I'm supporting things that help the American people. That's the disgust that people have because they keep growing government, whether it's the Republicans in charge or the Democrats in charge. But as far as working with other groups, I think my record is about as good as anybody's, because I work on the principle that freedom and the Constitution bring people together for different reasons. People use freedom in different ways, like it does. It invites variations in our religious beliefs, in economic beliefs. We tell people that they're allowed to, to spend their money as they choose. On civil liberties, that's a different segment. Republican conservatives aren't all that well known for protecting privacy and personal liberties. And when it comes to this spending overseas, I can work a coalition. Matter of fact, my $1 trillion proposal to cut spending doesn't immediately deal with Social Security. It's to try to work our way out of Social Security. I'm cutting $1 trillion by attacking overseas spending and going back to '06 budget. And I do not believe that you have to have pain. People who have gotten special privileges and bailouts from the government, they may get the pain, but the American people, if they get their freedom back and get no income tax, they don't suffer any pain.
Senator Santorum, here's the reality. 2 previous presidents, President Bush talked about being a uniter and not a divider. President Obama talked about transforming Washington, and it hasn't worked. Washington is polarized, the country is polarized, and the American people are pretty sick of the fact that nothing gets done in Washington. Specifically, how do you change that?
Well, let me first address Congressman Paul, because the serious issue with Congressman Paul here is you're right. He's never really passed anything of any import. And one of the reasons people like Congressman Paul is his economic plan. He's never been able to accomplish any of that. He has no track record of being able to work together. He's been out there on the margins and has really been unsuccessful in working together with anybody to do anything. The problem is that what Congressman Paul can do as commander-in-chief is he can, on day one, do what he says he wants to do, which is pull all our troops back out of overseas, put them here in America, leave us in a situation where the world is now going to be created huge amounts of vacuums all over the place, and have folks like China and Iran and others. Look at the Straits of Hormuz. As I said last night, we wouldn't even have the Fifth Fleet there. The problem with Congressman Paul is all the things that Republicans like about him he can't accomplish, and all the things they're worried about he'll do day one, and that's the problem. And so what we need to do is have someone who has a plan and has experience to do all the things Republicans and conservatives would like to do.
Let me get Dr. Paul to respond.
And then I'd like my opportunity to come back and answer the question.
It's not exactly a simple task to repeal approximately 100 years of us sliding away from our republic and still running a foreign policy of Woodrow Wilson, trying to make the world safe for democracy. And look, we have elections overseas and we don't even accept the elections. No, change in foreign policy is significant, but that's where a nation will come down if they keep doing this. We can't stay in 130 countries, get involved in nation building. We cannot have 900 bases overseas. We have to change policy. What about changing monetary policy? Yes, we do, but we've had that for 100 years. And right now, we're winning that battle. The American people now agree. About 75% of the American people now say we ought to audit the Federal Reserve, find out what they're doing, and who are their friends that they're bailing out constantly.
Senator Santorum, come back to this point. It's easy to say, boy, I'm going to change the culture in Washington. Hasn't worked for the past 2 presidents.
Well, it worked in my case. Look at welfare reform. And a federal entitlement that I remember standing next to Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Ted Kennedy, who were out there just talking about how this was going to be the end of civilization we know it. There'd be bread lines. The horrific consequences of removing federal income support from basically mothers with children. And we stood up and said, no, that creating dependency and creating that dependency upon federal dollars is more harmful than, and not believing in people and their ability to work is more harmful. And so we stood up and fought. and went out to the American public. Bill Clinton vetoed this bill twice. We had hard opposition, but I was able to work together and paint a vision. We made compromises, but not on our core principles. The core principles were this was going to end a federal program, we were going to require work, we were going to put time limits on welfare. I stuck to those principles, and we were able to compromise on some things like transportation funding and some daycare funding, all in order to get a consensus that poverty is not a disability, and that programs that we need to put in place should help transition people, not make them dependent. And we were able to get 70 votes in the United States Senate, including 17 Democrats.
Governor Huntsman, this question of if the leader of the Democrats promised to make you a one-term president, how would you go about dealing with them in a more effective way than you think the man you served, President Obama, did?
I think it comes down to one word, David, and I think the one word is trust. When the American people look at the political process play out, they hear all the spinning and all the doctrinaire language, and they still walk away with the belief that they're not being represented in Congress, that there's no trust in the executive branch. I mean, Simpson-Bowles' bipartisan proposal lands right on the desk of Barack Obama, and it lands in the garbage can. The first press conference I had when I ran for governor in 2004 was on ethics in government service. I talked about term limits. I talked about campaign finance reform. I talked about the role of lobbyists and knew I would make a lot of friends. I had one member of the legislature who supported me in that run. We won because we had the will of the people. And I believe the next president, and if that is to be me, I want to roam around this country and I want to generate the level of excitement and enthusiasm that I know exists among the American people to bring term limits to Congress, to close the revolving door on members going right on out and becoming a lobbyist. We've got to start with the structural problems. There is no trust.
All right. Governor Perry, I want to continue on the theme of leadership.
We need to.
This is, as you well know, New Hampshire is an independent place. And I wonder where, besides criticizing the previous administration for running up the debt, I wonder where you would buck your party. What would you say or do to make Republicans uncomfortable?
I hope I'm making Republicans uncomfortable right now by talking about the spending that they've done back in the 2000s when we had control of both parties.
But aside from that, I just mentioned that.
Well, listen, Dr. Paul says that the biggest problem facing this country is our work overseas. I disagree with that. The biggest problem facing this country today is a Congress that is out of control with their spending. And we've got to have someone, an outsider, that will walk in, not part of the insider group that you see here, people who have voted for raising the debt limit, people who have been part of the problem that is facing America. I will tell you two things that can occur that a president can lead the charge on, and it will put term limits into place. One of those is a part-time Congress to tell those members of Congress, we're going to cut your pay, we're going to cut the amount of time that you spend in Washington, D.C., send you back to your district so you can have a job like everybody else in your district has and live under the laws of which you passed, and then a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution.
Governor, my question,
do those two
but
things,
my question, sir, was
that will make them uncomfortable.
You think telling conservatives a balanced budget amendment is something I'm going to do and I'm going to cut spending? That's going to make them uncomfortable?
You darn right, because there's a bunch of people standing up here that say they're conservatives, but their records don't follow up on that.
All right, I got to take another break here. We'll come back on this point. Another quick break here. We'll return with much more. And of course, please share your thoughts with us online via Facebook at mtp.msnbc.com.
NBC News Facebook Republican presidential candidates debate continues in partnership with the New Hampshire Union Leader.
And we are back in New Hampshire. I'm happy to be joined now by our local partners for the debate. From the New Hampshire Union Leader, senior political reporter John DeStazo is with us. Good to have you here, John. And from WHDH, we had this problem yesterday, TV in Boston, Channel 7 in Boston, political editor Andy Hiller. Welcome to you as well. Glad to have you both. John, get us started.
All right, Governor Huntsman. It's winter in New Hampshire. It's a little mild, but it's still winter. Home heating oil is nearly $4 a gallon. Yet President Obama and Congress have cut by 25% the program that helps low-income people heat their homes. About 1 million households that were helped last year won't be helped this year. Is this an example of pain that must be suffered? Should this program funding be restored? Should it be cut more? Should this program be eliminated, perhaps? Where does this fit in? This is a practical problem in this area of the country.
No, we have people in need, we have people suffering, and this is a challenge that we need to address. But I believe we're not going to be able to effectively confront it head on until such time as this nation begins to move more toward greater energy diversity and energy independence. One of the first things I would do as president is I would take a look at that one product distribution bias that always favors one product, and that's oil. And I'd say if we're going to do what this nation needs to be done in terms of using a multiplicity of products that we have in such diversity and abundance and get them to the customers, we're going to have to break up that one product distribution monopoly. And I want to do to that oil distribution monopoly what we did to broadcast communication in the early 1970s. We blew it apart. We went to the Federal Trade Commission and said, we need more. We need diverse sources to draw from. We need to service the consumers. I believe if we're going to do it, it needs to be done from an energy independent standpoint. All products, getting the products to the customer, we've got to disrupt that one product monopoly that does not serve this country well, nor its consumers.
Congressman Paul, how do you feel about subsidies in general for a specific energy, and also, though, more specifically right now, more immediately, this low-income program, heating assistance program? Is this something that fits in under your view of what government does do or should not do?
Well, subsidies per se are, it's bad economic policy, it's bad moral policy, because it's using government force to transfer money from one group to another, and economically it does a lot of harm. But when it comes to energy, we should deregulate it like others talk about. But we need to talk, supply and demand. Everybody knows about supply and demand. They talk about oil, and if we had more alternative sources, that we always hope the prices will go down. But everybody forgets that there's 50% of a transaction is the monetary unit, and you don't deal. Very few people talk about the supply and demand of money. And when you create a lot of money, prices go up. So it goes up in the areas where government most gets involved, in education and medical care, housing, and in energy. So prices go up much faster than any other place. So if you subsidize somebody and you print money to do it, you compound the problem. It's good politics. Yeah, I'm going to subsidize you and take care of you, but it's bad economic policy, and it's not a good way to find any answers.
Governor Romney, this is such an important topic because beyond the regional implication, there's also a larger question about the social safety net. You talk all the time about opportunity for Americans, but what about Americans left behind? In this age of austerity, what do Americans have to learn to live with less of?
Well, what we don't need is to have a federal government saying we're going to solve all the problems of poverty across the entire country. Because what it means to be poor in Massachusetts is different than Montana and Mississippi and other places of the country. And that's why these programs, all these federal programs that are bundled to help people and make sure we have a safety net, need to be brought together and sent back to the states. And let states that are closest to the needs of their own people craft the programs that are able to deal with the needs of those folks. So you whether it's food stamps and housing vouchers, they're certainly on the list, but certainly Medicaid, home heating oil support. What unfortunately happens is with all the multiplicity of federal programs, you have massive overhead with government bureaucrats in Washington administering all these programs, very little of the money that's actually needed by those that really need help, those that can't care for themselves, actually reaches them. Government folks in Washington keep building program after program. It's time to say enough of that. Let's get the money back to the states the way the Constitution intended, and let states care for their own people in the way they feel best.
Andy Hiller.
Governor Romney, I'd like to remind you of something you said in Bay Windows, which is a gay newspaper in Massachusetts in 1994 when you were running against Senator Kennedy. These are your words. I think the gay community needs more support from the Republican Party, and I would be a voice in the Republican Party to foster anti-discrimination efforts. How have you stood up for gay rights, and when have you used your voice to influence Republicans on this issue?
Andy, as you know, I don't discriminate. And in the appointments that I made when I was governor of Massachusetts, a member of my cabinet was gay. I appointed people to the bench regardless of their sexual orientation. I made it very clear that, in my view, we should not discriminate in hiring policies, in legal policies. At the same time, from the very beginning in 1994, I said to the gay community, I do not favor same